The proposition was, to put it mildly, insane. It was dropped into the comfortable quiet of our living room on a Tuesday night, landing with all the grace of a dropped anvil. Leo, my best friend and roommate of 4 years, was sprawled upside down on our worn leather armchair, his long legs hooked over the back, a half-eaten bag of jalapeno kettle chips balanced precariously on his stomach. So, he said, his voice slightly muffled by his inverted position, "I have an idea. And before you say no, just hear me out. It's brilliant." I didn't look up from the architectural draft I was meticulously shading on my tablet. I knew Leo's brand of brilliant. It had previously resulted in us adopting a stray cat that turned out to be a raccoon, attempting to brew our own kombucha in the bathtub, and that one infamous weekend we spent trying to build an IKEA bookshelf without the instructions as a test of our masculine intuition. The bookshelf still leaned at a 7-degree angle in his bedroom, a monument to our failure. If it involves fermented tea or Swedish particle board, the answer is an immediate and unwavering no, I said, concentrating on the clean line of a support beam. It involves neither, he said, crunching loudly on a chip. It involves my brother's wedding and you. That got my attention. I swiped the screen of my tablet off and set it down, turning to look at him. His dark, curly hair was a chaotic halo on the floor, and his brow was furrowed with a seriousness that was completely at odds with his ridiculous posture. "My brother's wedding is in 3 weeks, he began. In Napa, a whole weekend event, Friday welcome dinner, Saturday ceremony, Sunday farewell brunch." "You're already going, obviously, I confirmed. I wouldn't miss it. Leo's family had unofficially adopted me years ago. A stray city kid with no family of his own to speak of. His mom sent me care packages and his dad called me to talk about football. I was an honorary Miller, right? So the thing is, Mark is going to be their double quotes of Mark, the ex-boyfriend. The one who had not just broken Leo's heart, but pulverized it, run it through a wood chipper, and then scattered the dust to the. For wines, they had dated for 2 years, and Mark had ended it 6 months ago via a text message, followed swiftly by an Instagram post of him and his new, impossibly handsome boyfriend on vacation in Tulum. The level of cruelty had been breathtaking, and I asked, my voice softening, and he's bringing the new guy. The Tulum upgrade, Leo said, finally sitting up properly, his face flushed, the bag of chips tumbled to the floor. And my entire extended family, from great Aunt Carol to my twice-removed cousin Brenda, is going to look at me with those sad, pitying eyes. You know the look, the "oh, poor Leo, all alone again" look. I can't take it, Eric, I really can't. I knew the look. I'd seen it directed at me plenty of times at my own firm's holiday parties, the sympathetic head tilt, the gentle hand on the arm. It was mortifying. "So what's your brilliant idea?" I asked, though a sense of deep foreboding was already beginning to crawl up my spine. "You want me to trip the new guy into the decorative fountain?" Tempting, but no, Leo said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the manic light of his impending proposal. "I want you to come as my boyfriend." I stared at him. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening. "You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend?" "Yes. Think about it. It's perfect. We're already best friends. We live together. We know everything about each other. It's completely plausible. You show up as my dashing, stable, successful boyfriend, the handsome architect. My family already loves you. It completely neutralizes the pity party. It shuts down any potential gloating from Mark. We get through the weekend. We have some free wine. And on Monday, we break up amicably. No muss, no fuss." I just kept staring, my brain trying to process the sheer audacity of the plan. I was an architect. I dealt in logic, in structure, in plans where every element had a purpose and a place. This was chaos theory. This was emotional anarchy. "Leo, that is the single worst idea you have ever had," I said, finally finding my voice. "And that includes the time you were convinced you could parkour across the rooftops to the grocery store. It's not, it's foolproof. It's full riddled. What about the details? How long have we been dating? How did we get together? What if your Aunt Carol interrogates me about our first date? What if we have to, what kiss? The word came out as a squeak. Leo waved a dismissive hand, though a faint blush crept up his neck. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. We can just be one of those couples that isn't into PDA. It's classy. I stood up and started pacing, running a hand through my shirt blonde hair. My life was orderly. I woke up at 6 a.m. every day. I ran exactly 5 kilometers. My sock drawer was organized by color and function. Leo was the whirlwind I allowed into my carefully structured world because he made it better, brighter, but this felt like inviting a hurricane into my living room and asking it to please not knock over the lamps. Our friendship was the most important relationship in my life. It was a comfortable, solid foundation. This plan felt like taking a sledgehammer to it. What if it got weird? What if it ruined everything? I can't, I said, shaking my head. It's too much. It's too messy. Leo's face fell. The manic gleam in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that he rarely showed. It was the same look he'd had the night Mark broke up with him, when he'd shown up at my bedroom door, phone in his hand, his face pale with shock. I'd spent the entire night with him on this very couch, letting him talk and rage and cry until he'd fallen asleep with his head in my lap. Please, Eric, he said, his voice quiet. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. The thought of facing him, of facing everyone. I just want to have one weekend where I don't feel like a failure. I just want to feel safe, and I always feel safe with you. That was the line that did it. The final, fatal blow to my carefully constructed wall of logic. He had weaponized our friendship, but he'd done it with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for a life raft, and I was, if nothing else, a very sturdy life raft. I let out a long, defeated sigh. Fine, his head snapped up. Really? God help me. Yes, fine. I stopped pacing and pointed a finger at him. But we are establishing rules, ironclad rules. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost tangible. He scrambled off the chair and onto the couch, grabbing a throw pillow to hug to his chest. Okay, rules. I can do rules. Rule number 1, I said, starting to pace again, my architect brain kicking into overdrive, trying to put some kind of structure on this impending disaster. This is a performance. There are no real feelings involved. We are actors playing a part. The second it feels weird, we pull the plug. Agreed, he said, nodding seriously. Rule number 2, we need a backstory. Plausible and detailed. We will rehearse it. I don't want to be caught in a lie about what we ate on our first fake date. Okay, good one. We can say it just happened, a slow burn. One night we were watching Blade Runner for the millionth time, and something just clicked. I felt a strange flutter in my chest at the image. I ignored it. Plausible. We'll workshop it. Rule number 3, physical contact. We need to define the boundaries. Hand-holding is probably necessary. A hand on the back. Maybe a casual arm over the shoulder. What about the kissing bridge? He asked, a hint of a smirk returning to his lips. The kissing bridge is closed for construction, I said firmly. Emergency use only, and I mean life or death. And Carol is holding a gun to our heads emergency. Got it. Kissing bridge is a toll road, currently out of service. What else? Rule number 4, clear and date. The performance concludes the moment we leave the farewell brunch on Sunday. We drive home, we walk into this apartment, and we are Eric and Leo, best friends and roommates, again. The relationship is over. We never speak of it again. He looked at me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Eric and Leo, best friends, always, always. I affirmed, the word feeling more important than usual. We sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of our ridiculous agreement settling over us. It was a pact, a conspiracy, a shared act of benevolent fraud. Okay, Leo said, breaking the silence as he stood up and stretched. Let's practice, practice. What? We have 3 weeks to workshop our fake first date. No, the physical contact stuff, he said, his voice casual, but I saw the slight tremor in his hand. We don't want it to look awkward the first time we do it. Come on, sit. He patted the cushion next to him. Hesitantly, I sat down, leaving a respectable, platonic distance between us. He shuffled closer, closing the gap. The warmth of his thigh pressed against mine was suddenly, alarmingly noticeable. Okay, he said, his voice a little strained. Let's just hold hands. He held his hand out, palm up, in the space between us. It was a familiar hand. I'd seen it wrap a bandage around my finger after a kitchen knife incident, seen it expertly adjust the settings on his camera, seen it gesture wildly as he told a story. But I had never seen it look so inviting. Slowly, I placed my hand in his. His fingers, warm and strong, wrapped around mine. His palm was calloused from carrying his heavy camera equipment, a contrast to my own smoother, office-dweller hands. It fit, better than it should have. We sat there on our couch, in our living room, our hands clasped together, saying nothing. The air felt thick, charged with a new, unspoken energy. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't strange, it felt simple, natural, which was, by far, the most terrifying thing of all. Okay, I said, my voice husky as I gently pulled my hand away. The loss of contact left my skin feeling cold. Practice over, Leo just nodded, not meeting my eyes. He looked down at his own hand as if he'd never seen it before. I retreated to my drafting tablet, but I couldn't focus. The clean lines on the screen seemed blurry. All I could feel was the phantom pressure of his fingers intertwined with mine. It was just a performance. It was just an act. We had rules. But as I sat there, trying to steady my own breathing, I had the sinking feeling that we were already breaking rule number 1, asterisk asterisk. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding were a strange exercise in methodical madness. My architect brain, which craved order and predictability, went into overdrive, creating the foundational blueprint for our fictional relationship. We designated evenings for story workshops, which usually involved a bottle of cheap red wine and a lot of laughing. But underneath the laughter was a current of nervous, focused energy. We were building a fantasy, and like any good structure, it needed to be sound. Okay, so the slow burn on the couch during Blade Runner is our origin story, I said one night, tapping a pen against my notebook where I'd sketched out a timeline. It's solid, it's believable, but we need texture. We need sensory details for when your Aunt Carol inevitably puts me under a spotlight. Leo was lying on the rug, staring up at the ceiling as if it held all the answers. Details, right. Okay, so after the movie ended, we were just quiet. For a while, you turned to me, and the light from the street lamp was coming through the window, hitting your face. Careful, I warned, my heart giving a stupid little lurch. Don't get too poetic. It'll sound fake. It's not poetic, it's a lighting observation. He shot back, ever the photographer. Fine. You turned to me and said something profound and romantic. Like what? Did you remember to take the recycling out? No, you idiot. He laughed, sitting up, something like, I think I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Cheesy, but effective. I wrote it down, my hand feeling unsteady. I think I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The line felt less like fiction and more like a confession I'd been suppressing for years. Okay, and then what? The first kiss. We need to have this locked down. The air in the room shifted. This was the part of the blueprint we'd been avoiding. The kissing bridge that was supposedly closed for construction. Right, Leo said, clearing his throat. He wouldn't quite meet my eye. It was hesitant at first. Not a big, dramatic movie kiss, just soft, gentle, like a question. I scribbled in the notebook, my pen strokes jerky. First kiss, hesitant, soft. I didn't dare look at him. I could feel his gaze on me, and if I looked up, I was afraid he'd see right through me, right through the character of fake boyfriend. Eric to the real Eric, who was imagining this scenario with far too much clarity. I could almost feel the phantom touch of his lips, the quiet intimacy of that invented moment. This was dangerous territory. We were supposed to be building a lie, but it felt like we were excavating a truth. The morning we were set to leave for Napa, the apartment was humming with a nervous tension. I had packed my bag with my usual precision, everything folded and arranged. Leo's duffel bag looked like it had exploded and been hastily zipped back up. It was us in luggage form. Did you remember the laminated backstory notes? He asked, pacing between the kitchen and the living room, a piece of toast hanging from his mouth. They're in my briefcase, next to the architectural plans for the fake summer home we're designing together. I deadpanned. He stopped and looked at Emmy. Wait, are we really doing that? No, Leo, it was a joke. Just get in the car. The drive north was a slow unwinding of that tension. For the first hour, we quizzed each other. What's my favorite color? Green, like a forest after it rains? Correct. What's the name of my first pet? Buster, the goldfish. You won at a carnival and who died 2 days later from what you diagnosed as existential ennui. Impressive. Slowly, the game faded away, replaced by the comfortable silence we knew so well. The golden hills of California rolled by, the sky a vast, cloudless blue. Leo fiddled with the playlist, a mix of his indie rock and my minimalist electronica that somehow worked. After a while, his head began to nod, and soon he was asleep, his head lolling against the cool glass of the passenger window. I glanced over at him. His face, usually so animated, was peaceful in sleep. His ridiculous curls were flattened against the window, and his mouth was slightly parted. This was the Leo I knew better than anyone, not the performer, not the heartbroken ex, just Leo. My Leo, a wave of affection, so potent and overwhelming it almost hurt, washed over me. It was a feeling far too large and complex for the simple box of friendship. I loved him. It wasn't a new revelation, but a deep, foundational truth I had spent years plastering over with logic and denial. And now, I was driving us into a situation where I had to pretend that this very real, very terrifying love was a brand new, comfortable romance. The irony was crushing. We arrived at the resort in the late afternoon. It was a sprawling, terracotta-roofed paradise nestled among vineyards, looking exactly like the brochure promised. I pulled the car into a spot under a canopy of oak trees and killed the engine. The performance was about to begin. We're here, I said softly. Leo woke with a start, blinking in the dappled sunlight. He looked around, and a wave of anxiety washed over his face. Oh, God, it's happening. Hey, I said, reaching over and putting a hand on his knee. A jolt went through me at the simple contact. We've got this. We've got our story. We've got our rules. Just follow my lead. He took a deep breath and nodded, placing his hand over mine for a second. Okay, lead on, fake boyfriend. We got out of the car and the warm, dry air smelled of grapes and earth. I walked around to the trunk, and as Leo came to stand beside me, I made a decision. I reached out and took his hand. He flinched for a split second before his fingers laced with mine. It wasn't hesitant or questioning. It felt like an anchor. Rule number 3 in effect, I murmured, giving his hand a light squeeze. Roger that, he whispered back, but a small, genuine smile touched his lips. We walked into the bustling lobby, hand in hand, and the act began. We were immediately enveloped by the Miller clan. Leo's mom, Diane, saw us first, her face breaking into a wide, delighted grin. There are my boys, she cried, rushing over to hug us both. She pulled back and her eyes went straight to our joined hands. A look of pure, unadulterated joy spread across her face. Well, it's about time, she exclaimed, winking at me. I've been telling Leo for years that he needed to stop messing around and snatch you up. Leo and I exchanged a wide-eyed, panicked look over his mother's shoulder. This was a complication we hadn't anticipated. Enthusiastic approval. It made the life feel both more secure and infinitely more treacherous. The welcome dinner was on a grand stone terrace overlooking the vineyards as the sun began to set. The air was filled with chatter and the clinking of wine glasses. We were a hit. We moved through the crowd as a unit, my hand resting on the small of his back, a gesture that felt both possessive and protective. We fielded questions with the ease of a seasoned improv duo. I told the story of the Blade Runner night to his, captivated and Carol, embellishing it with a detail about how I'd noticed the way Leo's eyes lit up when he talked about film. He, in turn, told his cousins about my passion for sustainable architecture, making me sound like a cross between Frank Lloyd Wright and a climate superhero. We were good at this, frighteningly good. It was intoxicating. And then I saw him across the terrace, standing near the bar, was Mark. He was exactly as Leo had described, handsome in a bland, generic way, with a smug smile plastered on his face. And next to him was the Tulum upgrade, who was, if possible, even more handsome. Leo saw them a second after I did. I felt him go rigid under my hand, all the color drained from his face. His confident, happy demeanor vanished, replaced by the haunted look I remembered from 6 months ago. Mark spotted us. His eyes flickered down to my hand on Leo's back, and his smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He nudged his boyfriend and they started walking towards us. This was it. The entire reason we were here, all our rehearsals, all our rules, were for this single moment. Breathe, I whispered in Leo's ear, my lips brushing against his skin. I didn't pull away, I moved closer, my arm wrapping more securely around his waist, pulling him against my side. I've got you. Hey, Leo, Mark said, his voice oozing false friendliness. Didn't know if you'd make it. He gestured to the man beside him. This is Julian, Mark, Leo said, his voice tight but steady. Good to see you, and you are? Julian asked, looking at me with a cool, appraising gaze. Before Leo could answer, I extended my free hand. Eric, I said, my voice calm and even. It's a pleasure. My grip was firm, my eye contact unwavering. I was no longer playing a part. This was real. This was me protecting the person I cared about most in the world. Mark's eyes darted. Between us, a flicker of something. Confusion? Jealousy in their depths. So, you two are? I didn't hesitate. I pulled Leo even closer, turned my head, and pressed a soft, deliberate kiss to his temple. He melted against me, a silent, grateful exhalation of breath. The gesture was small, intimate, and screamed a history that we didn't have, but that felt profoundly true in that moment. I looked back at Mark, a faint, confident smile on my lips. We are, I said, leaving the sentence hanging in the air, letting him fill in the blanks. The smugness was completely gone from his face. He looked uncomfortable, outmaneuvered. He mumbled something about getting another drink and practically dragged Julian away. The moment they were gone, Leo sagged against me. He turned his head, his face buried in my shoulder, his body trembled slightly. I just held him, my hand stroking his back, surrounded by the noise of the party, but utterly alone in our own small world. He pulled back after a long moment, his dark eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't decipher. It was gratitude, yes, but it was deeper than that. It was raw and overwhelming. The carefully constructed walls of our performance had just been demolished by one small, real gesture. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick. Always, I whispered back. He didn't move away. My arm was still wrapped tightly around his waist. His body was still pressed against mine. The sun had set and the fairy lights strung across the terrace cast a warm, golden glow on his face. The kissing bridge, I realized with a jolt of panic and exhilaration, was no longer under construction. It was right here, right now, and we were standing squarely in the middle of it. Asterisk, his silence in the hotel room was louder than the party we'd just left. I closed the door behind us, the soft click sealing us into our private bubble. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Mark had faded, leaving a strange, vibrating energy in its wake. Leo walked to the window and stared out at the meticulously landscaped resort grounds, his shoulders slumped. Are you okay? I asked, my voice sounding rough to my own ears. He turned, and in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, I could see the exhaustion on his face. I am now, he said, and his sincerity was a gut punch. I haven't felt that defended in a long time. The way you just stepped in, you didn't even hesitate, I shrugged, trying to downplay the fierce, primal protectiveness I had felt. That was the plan, right? Be a convincing boyfriend. No, he said, shaking his head as he walked closer. That wasn't the plan. The plan was a story about Blade Runner and holding hands. That was something else. You kissed me, Eric. I kissed your temple. I clarified my cheeks. Growing warm, it was a strategic move, an act of tactical affection. He stopped in front of me, his gaze intense. It didn't feel tactical. We stood there, the space between us charged with everything we weren't saying. Rule number 1: no real feelings was flashing in my mind like a critical system error. I had built this entire charade on a foundation of rules, of clear and distinct boundaries. But my actions on the terrace hadn't come from the blueprint. They had come from somewhere deeper, a place I had deliberately kept off the architectural drawings of my life. We should get some sleep, I said, taking a step back, needing to re-establish the distance. Big day tomorrow. Your brother's actual wedding? Leo just nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. Yeah, you're right. He ran a hand through his messy curls. Hey, Eric, yeah, thank you for something else. He didn't wait for a reply, just disappeared into the bathroom. I stood for a moment in the quiet room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had wanted this ridiculous plan to feel safe for him, but I was quickly realizing how unsafe it was for me. It was giving me a taste of a life I'd only ever let myself dream about in the vaguest of terms, and I was starting to suspect it was a taste I wouldn't be able to forget. That night, lying in my bed just a few feet from his, sleep was elusive. I could hear the soft rhythm of his breathing, a familiar and comforting sound that had suddenly taken on a new significance. I was acutely aware of him, of his presence in the room, in a way I had never been before. The line between Eric the best friend and Eric the fake boyfriend had dissolved, and I wasn't sure I knew how to draw it again. The wedding day dawned bright and painfully beautiful. The ceremony was held outdoors in a garden bursting with white roses and lavender. As Leo's brother and his new wife exchanged their vows under a canopy of ancient oaks, I found myself watching Leo instead. He was standing beside me, looking handsome and sharp in his suit, and as his brother spoke of finding his one true partner, a single tear traced a path down Leo's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but one of genuine, heartfelt joy for his family. Without thinking, my fingers found his. I laced them together, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. He looked over at me, his eyes wide and vulnerable, and he squeezed back. In that silent moment, surrounded by 100 people celebrating love, our own quiet, complicated story felt more real than ever. We were playing our parts perfectly, but we were the only two people in the world who knew the truth. The performance was becoming effortless because the feelings behind it were no longer fake. The reception was a boisterous, champagne-fueled affair in a grand, high-ceilinged ballroom. We sat at the family table, fielding more winks from his mother and a series of deeply personal questions from a tipsy Aunt Carol about our future plans. I found myself improvising answers about a hypothetical house we might one day design and build together, a house with a darkroom for him and a studio with a northern exposure for me. The fantasy was so vivid, so detailed, that it hurt. Leo played along, adding details about a garden we would have, his hand resting casually on my thigh under the table. Each touch, each shared glance, felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of this beautiful, fragile lie. Then the band started to play a slow song. Couples began to drift onto the dance floor. Leo's brother and his wife, his parents, aunts, uncles. Oh, this is my favorite, Diane said, nudging Leo. Go on. You two, dance. Panic flared in my chest. This was not in the blueprint. This was a new level of intimacy we hadn't prepared for. Dancing meant holding each other close. Leo looked at me, a question in his eyes. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We couldn't refuse. We stood up and walked to the dance floor, the short distance feeling like a mile. I placed one hand on his waist, and he hesitantly rested his on my shoulder. We took each other's free hand, a formal, respectable distance between us. We moved, stiffly, to robots attempting to simulate human emotion. We look like we're at a middle school prom, Leo murmured, a nervous laugh in his voice. Relax, I whispered back, though my own heart was racing. Just follow me, I pulled him a little closer, letting our joined hands drop. I moved my hand from his waist to the middle of his back, guiding him into a more natural rhythm. He visibly relaxed, his body melting into the movement. After a moment, he let go of my shoulder and wrapped both arms loosely around my neck, resting his head against my shoulder. My breath hitched. I could feel the warmth of his cheek against my neck, smell the faint, clean scent of his skin. The world narrowed to this small circle of light on the dance floor. The music, the crowd, the light all faded away. There was only the solid weight of him in my arms, the soft beat of the music, and the undeniable, terrifying feeling that this was where I was supposed to be. This felt more real than my organized sock drawer, more solid than any building I had ever designed. We're getting really good at this, he whispered, his voice muffled by my suit jacket. Too good, I thought. When the song ended, we didn't immediately spring apart. We lingered for a moment, caught in the quiet aftermath. He lifted his head, and his face was just inches from mine. His eyes, dark and deep, searched my face, and I saw a reflection of my own confusion, my own longing. The air crackled. The kissing bridge was right here, and the toll was our carefully constructed friendship. We stepped back at the same time, the spell broken. I need some air, he said, his voice husky. Me too, I agreed. We slipped out a side door onto a deserted moonlit balcony. The cool night air was a welcome shock. We stood side by side, leaning against the stone balustrade, not speaking. The silence wasn't comfortable this time. It was thick with unspoken admissions. Eric, he said finally, turning to face me, what are we doing? We're pretending to be boyfriends at your brother's wedding, I said, the words sounding hollow and ridiculous now. Are we? He asked, taking a step closer, because it doesn't feel like pretending anymore. Not to me, my carefully maintained control shattered. All the rules, all the logic, all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, they were no match for the truth that was standing right in front of me. His heart in his eyes. It doesn't to me either, I confessed, the words torn from me. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He reached up, his hand gently cupping my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, a soft, tentative gesture. It wasn't tactical, it wasn't a performance. It was a question. And this time, I had the answer. I leaned in, and he met me halfway. The kiss was nothing like the hesitant, soft one we had invented for our backstory. It was real. It was a collision of years of unspoken friendship, of weeks of escalating tension, and a moment of pure, unadulterated truth. It was hesitant and hungry, gentle and desperate all at once. It was the taste of red wine and the feeling of coming home. It was everything. We broke apart, both breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. The bridge is definitely not closed for construction, he whispered, a shaky laugh in his voice. I closed my eyes, a wave of terror and elation washing over me. The game was over, the performance had ended. Rule number 3 hadn't just been broken, it had been obliterated. And in the wreckage, something terrifying and beautiful was beginning to take shape. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a surreal haze. After the kiss on the balcony, the kiss that had redrawn the map of our entire world, we re-entered the ballroom as two completely different people. We were no longer actors, the performance was over, but the roles remained. When I took his hand now, it wasn't a strategic move, it was an instinct. When he leaned against me while talking to his cousins, it wasn't for show, it was for the simple comfort of my presence. The lie had become so intertwined with the truth that we couldn't tell them apart. No one else noticed the shift, of course. To them, we were still just Leo and Eric, the happy new couple, but to us, every touch, every glance was a silent, thrumming acknowledgement of what had happened between us. We danced again, and this time, there was no hesitation. I pulled him close, his arms circling my neck as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We moved as one, lost in the music, in the crowd, in the dizzying new reality we had stumbled into. I buried my face in his hair, breathing him in, terrified and thrilled by the finality of it all. We had crossed a line, and I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core that I never, ever wanted to go back. The farewell brunch on Sunday was the final act. We sat at a long table in the sun-drenched courtyard, sipping mimosas and recounting stories from the reception. Mark and Julian were at the far end of the table, looking subdued. Mark avoided my gaze, and I felt a small, uncharitable flicker of satisfaction, but my focus wasn't on him anymore. It was on Leo. It was on the way his hand kept finding mine under the table, his thumb tracing idle circles on my palm. It was on the way he'd catch my eye from across the table and give me a small, secret smile that was just for me. This was supposed to be the end of the performance. According to rule number 4, the moment we left this brunch, the relationship was over. We would drive home, walk into our apartment, and revert to being just friends. The thought was unbearable. It felt like planning a demolition. How could we possibly go back to the way things were? How could I go back to seeing his hand and not wanting to hold it? How could I go back to sitting on the couch and pretending that I hadn't memorized the feeling of his lips on mine? The drive home was the polar opposite of the drive up. The silence wasn't comfortable or contemplative. It was heavy with the weight of our impending deadline. The rulebook I had so carefully written lay between us like an unexploded bomb. Every mile we covered brought us closer to the moment we would have to confront it. I pulled into our usual parking spot behind our apartment building and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. Neither of us moved. This was it. The performance was officially over. So, Leo said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on the dashboard. We're home, yeah, I said, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. We are, end of the line, he added, and the words sounded like a eulogy. I finally turned to look at him. He was staring at his hands, which were clenched in his lap. The confident, radiant man from the wedding was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and uncertain. Leo, I started, my voice tight. About the rules, I know, he cut in, finally looking at me. His eyes were full of a deep, wrenching sadness. Rule number 4, back to Eric and Leo, best friends, I get it. The deal's a deal. He tried for a smile, but it was a pathetic, brittle thing. It was a hell of a performance, though. Right, we should take our act on the road. He was giving me an out. He was offering to bury what had happened, to pretend that the kiss on the balcony was just a final, dramatic flourish in our play. He was willing to sacrifice his own heart to save our friendship, to save me from the messiness he thought I couldn't handle. And I saw in that moment the incredible depth of his love for me, a love that was willing to put my comfort before his own happiness. The realization broke my heart. No, I said, my voice firm. He looked confused. No, I repeated, undoing my seatbelt and turning fully to face him. I'm not holding up my end of the deal. I'm breaking the rules, all of them. I reached out and took his hands, my grip certain. I'm breaking rule number 4 because I don't want to go back to being just your best friend. And I'm breaking rule number 1 because this stopped being a performance for me a long time ago. Maybe it never was. There are real feelings involved, Leo. So many real feelings, relief and hope warred in his eyes. Eric, are you sure? Your lists, your order, this is messy. This is not on the blueprint, so we draw up a new blueprint, I said, my voice filled with a passion I didn't know I possessed. A blueprint for what's real? I don't care if it's messy. My life has been clean lines and right angles for so long, and I was starting to think it was a masterpiece. But it wasn't, it was just an empty building. You're the one who fills it, Leo, you always have been, tears welled in his eyes. And he let out a shaky, incredulous laugh. I thought I was the one who messed up your blueprints. You are, I said, a smile breaking across my face. You come in like a hurricane and you force me to reevaluate the structural integrity of everything I thought I knew. And it's the best thing that has ever happened to me. I squeezed his hands. I'm in love with you, Leo, I think. I have been for years, but I was too scared and too stubborn to admit it to myself. I love you too, he whispered, the words he'd been holding back all weekend finally tumbling out. God, Eric, I love you so much. I was so terrified you were just being a good friend. Doing the best, most noble, most self-sacrificing thing a friend could do. It started that way, I admitted, but it ended up being the most selfish thing I've ever done because it gave me an excuse to have what I've always wanted. He leaned across the console, and this time, there was no hesitation, no question. He kissed me, a deep, affirming kiss full of relief and promise. It was a kiss that sealed the end of our old story and began a new one. We walked into our apartment not as roommates, but as something new, something undefined and exhilarating. The air was different, the familiar space of our living room, the sight of our ridiculous proposition, felt charged with possibility. Leo dropped his bag by the door and walked into the center of the room, turning in a slow circle. So he said, a wide, brilliant smile on his face. What now, boyfriend? The word, which had felt so foreign and theatrical just a few days ago, now sounded like the most natural thing in the world. It sounded like home. I walked over to him, wrapping my arms around his waist and pulling him close. Now, I said, pressing a kiss to his forehead, we start designing that house. The one with the darkroom and the studio. He laughed, a rich, happy sound that filled the room, erasing all the quiet, lonely echoes of the past. Is that on the blueprint? He asked, his eyes sparkling. It is now, I said, looking at the man in my arms, my best friend, my partner, my beautiful, chaotic hurricane. It's the only thing on the blueprint that matters.